We live? We're live. Welcome to the Unicorn Whisperer, where we learn from talent leaders who build, run, manage billion-dollar teams. Today we sit down with Andrew Cesarz, who is a decorated unicorn, someone who's worked at Salesforce, Rippling, Uber, Facebook, and he's going to give us some insights into how he got there, what's made him successful, and what he's doing today. And so welcome, Andrew, to the Unicorn Whisperer podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. We open with the same thing across every podcast. Tell me about yourself in 30 seconds or less. How'd you get to where you are now? What brings you to the Unicorn Whisperer podcast?
All right. Well, I'm going to hold myself to the 30 seconds. I'll start now. I got started off in recruiting about 13 years ago. Started from the bottom. I started as a coordinator. I can go into more detail on how that happened later, but from there, moved up to sourcing roles, eventually sales recruiting roles, and eventually into management. Got started off at a tech startup and then eventually found my way to Uber, where I met Eric. And at Uber, really learned how to scale an organization, hire very fast, and then moved up into leadership, where I am now. I've been in recruiting leadership for the past 5 years or so.
I always ask people, what did you go to school for, and how did you get into recruiting? Because I think it's a path that usually has many different entry points, but what's yours?
Yeah, I think mine is very similar to most, being I fell into it. Didn't go to school for recruiting. I probably didn't know that recruiting was a thing when I was in school. I graduated with an undergraduate degree in sociology. So it's not irrelevant.
That's closer than a lot of others who start.
Yeah, I think that most degrees can prep you well for a career in recruiting, but I think it helps certainly to understand how societies work, how people interact with each other.
And then what brought you to, I think Yelp was your first role, right? And you entered directly into recruiting from college. So you are a unicorn of unicorns.
I fell into it. Like I said, I was actually in graduate school. So I was in graduate school. It was a 2-year program. And I had just finished my first year. It was summer. I had a lot of friends that were working at Yelp at the time, a lot of friends in sales at Yelp, a couple in HR. And one posted on Facebook one day that they needed a recruiting coordinator to come in for contract 2 weeks, just 2-week contract role. So I went in the day that I saw the post, interviewed, told to come back on Monday to be a coordinator for 2 weeks. And that turned into about a year, and I didn't go back to grad school.
Nice. Okay. Well, so wait, you posted on like your wall? How did you, because Facebook now, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I would know how to find a job on Facebook today.
A friend of mine worked in HR at Yelp, posted on his wall that they needed a coordinator for 2 weeks to come in, and I responded. Obviously, he was my friend.
Did you like the post? You remember, did you like it or comment back, or you just
all the above? I probably poked him too.
I forgot about the pokes. Did you work at Facebook for the pokes?
I worked at Facebook for the pokes.
You worked at Facebook for the pokes. Do they still have it? I don't know. I haven't logged on in a while. Sorry, guys.
Does anyone log in?
I don't know. Somebody's using it.
Yeah, my mom.
Well, you've worked at, I think you're at 6, by my count, unicorns, billion-dollar companies. What are the unicorns that you've worked at? It was Yelp, Salesforce.
Yeah, Yelp. They had IPO'd when I was there, which was really exciting for a first job. It definitely set the standard high, where I was like, oh, well, if this is what tech companies are like, then I want to always work at them. So it was Yelp and then Salesforce. Salesforce was already really big at the time. And then Uber, brief break, I went to Facebook, went back to Uber, and then went to Twilio, and then Rippling, and now Airwallex.
Nice. Yeah, decorated, like I said. You've done a lot, and you've actually had kind of, I won't call it, in a few, weeks or months, we're probably going to release our recruiting career ladder. But when I envision it, I see a normalized progression. I think tech companies can do. It's the unicorn, especially fast scaling unicorns, can do it a number of different ways. But going from coordinator to sourcer to recruiting to leadership, how did you progress? Like, what was the jump from coordinating into sourcing? And then how did you make the conversion from sourcing to recruiter?
Yeah. So I always describe recruiting and the career path in recruiting to be that of sales. It mirrors a sales career path, just different titles, but essentially very similar. So coordinating, maybe there's one role that's not in sales, scheduling, right? I started off in Yelp, being a coordinator. When I moved to Salesforce, it was in the pursuit of becoming a recruiter. And so I took a gamble by starting again as a coordinator at Salesforce. And not only was it a gamble because it was back square one, but it was a contract role. But I knew from what I learned about Salesforce at the time is that they had a great promotion path. They had a ton of options in terms of moving up from a coordinator, and thought it was worth the risk. So when I went to Salesforce back in the day, about 13 years ago, I told myself, like, hey, you're gonna be a coordinator and you're gonna try to get promoted as quick as you can to be full-time. I told myself 3 months. Impress people, take on extra tasks, get promoted in 3 months. And it was 3 months to the day that I was promoted into an outbound sourcing role. And so outbound sourcing, similar to sales, business development rep. So prospecting, cold calling.
Building the lists.
Building the list.
Yeah, and then you and I were both combining that, which, by the way, to anyone listening, if you can perfect your outbound sourcing routine, meaning set a good target list, get people to convert from hearing your opportunity to I'm a candidate, that will pay dividends throughout your IC career, because that's the difference between production when inbound is low and you kind of ebb and flow with the business and actually keeping your numbers up.
Yeah.
Especially as Andrew and I have experienced during times of negative press when you're not getting the inbound applications that you're
Yeah. I mean, even today, I'd say that I'm the recruiter I am today and the recruiting leader I am today because of my first role after coordinating being outbound sourcer. I had to learn quickly in order to hit my metrics, how to write Boolean strings, how to use LinkedIn Recruiter, utilize all the filters they had available, not depend on any inbound to make your hires. I think that really set me up for success later on.
I always thought outbound was more fun. Like, I had to convince you to take a job somewhere versus kind of, or not order take, but like the recruiter phone screen was relatively redundant, where the outbound side was like, I got to try to convince you, you should work here, and it was always more exciting.
I will say, I don't really believe other people when they say otherwise, that a hire is worth more if you were the source of that hire. It always hits different.
Yeah.
And I know
Do you account for that when you're like, let's say you have a team of, 10 recruiters right now, or in your leadership roles, have you in the past ever accounted for like source of hire as part of the recruiter performance process?
Certainly. I've definitely set goals on targets for your source of hire. So maybe if you've had 10 hires, I expect you to have about 25%, 30% of them coming from sourced personally. And then we're floating the idea right now of measuring our own recruiters at Airwallex with an accelerator from having a sourced hire.
Okay. Do you separate, do you have sourcers that support, or are you doing full cycle recruiting at Airwallex?
At Airwallex, we're very, in many ways, flat, I guess you can call it, organization. So we actually don't have sourcers.
Okay.
We don't have coordinators, so we do it all. As recruiters, we're a bit of everything. Yeah.
I've had many roles, particularly the earlier stage you go. So not all unicorns exist at the time that you join. So if you're going to join a scaling company, developing a sourcing skill and leveraging that throughout your entire career, like, you'll see that, like I said, pay dividends as an IC recruiter. It's just a skill it's required. Like, unicorn that I've been at, sourcing has helped me get ahead at that business.
I mean,
what makes you good at it? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, if you're at a unicorn, maybe earlier stage, you're not going to have the brand recognition. You likely won't have a ton of inbound. And if you do, they're not going to maybe meet the niche requirements you're looking for. So you're going to have to go source.
So outside of sourcing, what other things that are, as you progressed from being a sourcer to being a recruiter and then recruiting into leadership, what is the skill equal to being a great IC made you a great manager, right? Like, what did you develop that was a skill set difference from IC to management that you would say, like, this is what I would go back and teach myself earlier, I would recommend for someone else looking to get into a leadership position?
Yeah, I think mastering the recruiting backpack of competencies was one. Like, that's kind of obvious, but knowing how to source, knowing how to create great candidate assessment, knowing how to manage your pipeline, and also knowing how to manage stakeholders, how to really partner with them to understand their needs of a search. I think mastering all that is foundational. And then as you moved up to management, it was teaching others. I got into management because I wanted to help others become successful in recruiting, to see the success I had as a recruiter. So I think that was the next logical step. And the thing I had to master at that time was how to motivate others, how to get them to want to excel in the recruiting path and learn what I learned. And then I think the stakeholder piece. As a recruiter, you can manage stakeholders, and that's a good skill set you need to master. But as a manager, it's a bit different. You have to manage the business not only from a helping them hire perspective, but helping them manage their headcount, manage their hiring to hit hiring goals in a certain timeline, helping them understand that pacing, is it realistic? What needs to be adjusted? I think that was something that definitely took time to learn. And I wish I could have learned sooner, but at the same time, I learned from great leaders, but I also had to have some fails in there to get better at that.
Yeah, I have a career progression philosophy that's worked well for me, which is find people that you want to be like and stand next to them, because they will teach you way faster than you can learn on your own or without somebody who's already been where you're going. And it's a large reason why I attribute wherever I am today is to that strategy. But you said a couple of things that are like super interesting. It's like, one, the recruiter competencies have to be nailed. So for anyone who's listening that's on the Unicorn site, we have a talent leader interview rubric. There's about 25 competencies where we describe like what strong yes is for, being a recruiting leader in each of those zones. And what you'll see is there's a bunch of IC skills that are there, not only because your scaling unicorns are going to have you be a hands-on recruiting leader, particularly for executive roles, but you need to be able to teach the things that you're going to set and be good at to your team. So you have to like know what the expectation is, of live that expectation, and be able to drive other folks' accountability for it. And that goes both ways, right? With your hiring managers, who you're going to have to wrangle into getting a good intake session, interview rubric, interview process, debrief, right? You got to get those folks to do what you need them to do, but also you have to know that your recruiters can be accountable to those same goals. Let me ask you this question. When you're managing recruiters, do you do quota-based, or do you do capacity demand, or do you have like a different way to manage like how much production they should have?
Quota-based. So setting goals for recruiters, number of hires to hit monthly, quarterly.
And do you incent if they overproduce? Do you give them like a bonus if they do more, like specifically on production, or is it the total story for...
Yeah.
Total
story. Yeah, definitely. I think metrics are one component of someone's performance, but also recruiters are measured on the competencies for their role. How are they performing against each competencies? We're in the process right now of building out a recruiter talent acquisition partner framework for competencies, and I think there's five or six that we're creating, and then having different levels as you move up in the progression.
That's awesome. You're gonna have to give me some advice on the ones that we have up there. I'm sure we can learn from what you're building. So what are you the best at? Like when you're thinking about leading your hiring managers or building something for an external hiring team or a non-recruiting hiring team, what do you do well? What do you do great? What should we focus on today?
Yeah, I think something that I mastered early on was setting up a great process with a hiring manager. From that first meeting, kicking off a role, intake meeting, creating a framework, creating a plan of how we're going to tackle a role. Setting that up early on enables you to kind of move like a machine as you turn on the recruiting engine for a certain search. This is something we learned at Uber, especially when you had roles that were repeatable, high volume hiring. If you set this up at the beginning, you can really nail the recruiting and have it scale for next time.
100%. Well, especially during that high volume time. Like I remember, it's a great accountability tool. Like someone says, like, this is what I'm looking for. And if you start to get to this place where they're starting to say no to that, excuse me.
Did it change?
Yeah. Yeah. Do we have, is there something different that I'm unaware of? Because
and it can, and that's okay. But it's great to have this documented. You can iterate on it. It holds everyone accountable.
Managers are forgetful. They didn't know they changed it until you show them where we came from, which is, again, it's fine, especially as you develop new roles. So do you do an intake session? Like, let's say someone's going to open a role that you've already hired before. Are you doing an intake session with them? Does it look the same as a brand new role? And how do you do that?
Yeah, for a role that we've worked on before, definitely going to do an intake form or an intake meeting with corresponding intake form, again, for a couple of reasons. Maybe the search right now for the role is the same role, but maybe some of the needs are slightly different. Maybe the preferred qualifications are going to be a little more nuanced this time. Or maybe maybe they've had some developments in their organization, maybe their career framework for that role has had updates. Let's make sure the intake form aligns. Yeah.
Yeah, I always used it to audit. It would be my, here's what we talked about, and then I have all these different things that I need to audit. I need to audit the job description. Are you saying the same thing when we advertise it? Or are your interviewers saying the same thing that we talked about? One of my favorite things to do was just to like look at whatever not the role responsibilities, but like the qualifications and just align it to the leveling framework. It's like, this sounds like a manager, but we're intaking it and you're telling me this is an IC. I don't know if we're gonna do this. How do you push back on managers when you find like variances like that?
So in the example of the role, maybe they've given you a job description that they took a first stab at and they want 10 years of experience, but it's a associate level role. I think you would want to show them a bit of here's what the market has for associate levels. You're looking at 4 years. Or let's look at your associate level person on your team right now or in your org. Do they have 10 years? So I think it's just making level setting with external data, internal data.
That's good. I've never done that. That's smart. I haven't done that before, where you just kind of take a look at the existing lineup and you say, let's take a look at who these peers would be. Because even if they did get what they wanted, you're creating some level of someone's going to be upset. Like if you have 4 people on the team that all have 2-3 years of experience, and then you hire someone with 10. Someone's going to be upset about that, or maybe not. But it's just one of those things where you have to be aware of it so that you could prevent the risk.
I would call it misleveling someone. So if you went with 10 and it was an associate level, you might be misleveling them. They're going to come in and expect a really fast promotion, or you'll see them leave soon. But I find that pushing back on that example, 99% of the time, the hiring manager is going to be like, oh, yeah, like that doesn't make sense. And they'll come down on the years of experience.
How do you get them to commit to these different things? Like when you do the intake session, what do they leave with? What do you give them? Like how do you set it in stone, or let's call it printed on paper, because stone's a little permanent for how dynamic you're going to be?
Yeah, well, I think having it written down, having it be a live document, Google Doc, something that is editable is a must. Like, you have to have it documented, and there can be changes that you make, right? That's okay, but they can alert you of like, oh, I want to make this tweak, and then you can update it accordingly. But in an intake meeting, an intake form, I would honestly, it sounds silly, but you really start with the basics, like title of role, level of role, location, and then job description. The job description should be in there front and center so that you make sure that it is exactly aligned to the competencies, the interview plan, the actual steps of the interview process. So when they leave there, hopefully, dream state after a first meeting, you have the job description cleaned up, you have the interview plan hitting all the competencies that are in the requirements of the role. So by the time they're walking away, they have this document, living document of, like I said before, the machine. You plug candidates in and they go through it. They meet the job requirements, and then now they're going to meet at each interview step and the competencies. And dream state, again, perhaps matrix, interview matrix.
Do you require the job description before? Is that like their entry pass into the intake session? Like, do they at least need a job description to get a meeting with you, or
No.
are you lenient?
I'm lenient. If someone doesn't have a job description in there, if they haven't built out this interview intake form before a first meeting, we'll do it together in the meeting, and we'll start with the basics. Maybe they didn't know where to start. Maybe they didn't know where a job description lived for this role, if they're new, if the role's new. So we can look at that together, pull old ones. If there's never been one before at the company, like you take it to the market. What are companies with this job? What do they have posted? Guess what? AI exists now. We can start using that as well to help build out a first draft.
I've seen some cool tools that exist in the AI space for creating these rubrics. I haven't seen them in action. I can't endorse them yet, but I know that they're getting.
I use some.
Really? What do you think?
Gemini, ChatGPT, great first start. Yeah. You have to be pretty descriptive. I find myself, you're almost doing a first draft in the prompt, right? Like you're saying, like, here's what we're looking for. Here's how we'd like to measure it. Here's what good would look like. Expand on that. You have to give it quite a bit of information, but you could do it in a rough way. You could do it in the rough notes, and then it really polishes it up and cleans it up for you. I wish this existed when we were earlier in our careers.
I know. I would say, I think maybe you and I get together, we start our own GPT, but I feel like I couldn't do that or know what good looks like unless I had kind of struggled my way through building one and trying to
Yeah.
extract like, because ChatGPT has the same problem we have, which is someone's going to use some jargon. We're at Uber and people are saying DOPS. You know what I mean? It's like, we don't, what is that? Even if we spelled it out, we don't know we don't know. That's driver operations for anyone who's not one of us. But like, even if we spelled it out, like, it's never existed before. So you have to kind of like,
You have
my
to
favorite
feed
thing was
it.
I go up to people and be like, explain this job to your grandmother. 3 bullet points. You have 3 sentences to your grandma, and then those would be my competencies that I would then put in the interview process. Like, competency 1 is to interviewer 1, competency 2, interviewer 2. And I would like hammer into making it that simple, because
Yeah.
if it's complicated between the recruiter and the hiring manager, some software engineer or marketing manager or whatever who's going to do the interview later it doesn't have time to like interpret what we're thinking. They got to have their own thing. So how do you simplify this intake session for, your sourcer when you have one, or for other interviewers? Like, what are steps that you take to like put this into something that's digestible for an outside consumer?
For going into creating it, or
Like, after you've created one. So you've done the intake session, you've gotten your kind of like basic framework done. Other people now need it to consume for interviewers.
right,
How do you
right.
give it to them in a way that's like not a jargony box of mess?
Yeah, I think when I think of intake forms, I think of, like I said, the basics, the job description, and then there's going to be a section of pitching the role. Ideally, things like why does this role exist? What are some things this person will work on in the first 3 months? What is career growth in this role? Why is the work exciting? What are challenges? So this basic information provided by the hiring manager is going to be a great way for a sourcer, for a recruiter, even someone who's covering the role. Maybe a recruiter has to cover for a week. They're going to be able to go into that, and that's how they're going to pitch the role. These are common questions a candidate would even have. They could refer to it. But beyond that, you would have interview plans. So that's the recruiter call. What are the competencies covered? What are the questions they need to meet on a first call in order to move forward to the next one? That should be spelled out. And again, ideal state, not only questions spelled out, but what's the measurement?
Right.
What was a good answer versus a bad answer? If I'm asking how much driver operations experience you have, is the right answer 0? Is the right answer 2 years?
100%. I think what we're getting at for anyone listening is that the intake session kind of sets the stage for all of these downstream things. So your sourcer needs to know what to look for based on either keywords or themes that you pull out of the intake session. Your interviewers need to know what to interview for. And then if you can give them what yes is, right? Just some blanket framework for what yes is, they'll be able to enter that into scorecards or talk about it in the debrief, which ultimately comes back to, can I give a candidate feedback if they didn't get the job about where they specifically missed? Because the worst thing for candidates is you go through all the process. It's like, we actually decided to go with someone else, and that's the only information that you get. So the intake session, it's like the beginning. It's like this blueprint for how it's going to go. And then if things start going different from what you thought was expected, you at least have this document that says like, excuse me,
Yeah.
right here, we said this and it's
Yeah.
not happening that way. And now I have a bunch of declines that I can't explain, or I have a bunch of, I'm not meeting my time to fill, or I'm not meeting my production number. So I got to explain it to somebody. And so
Right.
super
it's
key part of the process.
It's key for any search. It's key for even in the niche. We're going to hire one person for this job search, but I'd say it's almost the most important for any role where you're hiring more than one. So we're hiring 4 marketing managers. If you don't set this up, if you don't have a agreed upon interview path or plan, what happens inevitably is candidate 1, I want them to talk to Joe next, but candidate 2, I want them to talk to Bob first, then go to Joe. You'll get these very disorganized one-offs that, frankly, a recruiter will have a tough time managing.
Right.
And inevitably it ends up being a negative candidate experience.
One of the, what's your opinion on this? Because I did it for a while with mixed reviews. I thought it was great for recruiting, but let's just say the business wasn't a fan. We would mark on the intake session form, right? We would keep it as a record. We have like a little activity feed on it. This is when it changed. this is when we redid it. And we would be able to kind of point back to the evolution of something, even though we couldn't really track the history of it, like what was the changes, we would know this is what changed. And then when we did that, we can say like, oh, it happened while we were working on it as recruiters. So, this
Yeah.
is why maybe the role wasn't filled on time. So it's kind of laborious to do, but like, what are your thoughts on that? Tracking those changes, like,
I'm a big fan of that. As a recruiter, there's always a certain component of you want to cover your own butt at the end of the day. So if a hiring manager's completely changed a search after about a month, I would definitely document that somewhere of, okay, like here's version 2 of the role. Here's maybe even a note on the impact of the search. We're having to actually refresh our entire pipeline. So you want to document that for your own record later. If someone asks, why was that search? Why did it take 3 months? Why did it take 6 months to fill? You can tell a story. It might be hard to remember after a while. I also played with this in ATS, also, applicant tracking system. If a search maybe changes dramatically, I've set rules before where if you're making a change to the job description, then technically, let's reset the clock on when that job was opened. Maybe close that version, open a new one. That's kind of a similar way we've tracked this before in past roles.
yeah, I think change tracking for anyone looking to this applies to you as an individual recruiter. So I'll put a link in the description below, but I did a recruiter performance lesson for this company called Purple. And one of them was the idea was like, how do you get the most of your review as a recruiter? And one of the things is like tracking the changes that happen to you. And as an individual recruiter, that helps you like give this context. But as a recruiting leader, you kind of need that context to have a productive management conversation. So for anyone listening, like when you're having this conversation about things change and it then creates a recruiting problem, everyone's aware of what's happening, but it's anecdotal. So you're setting your recruiting leader to go into a conversation and defend you with like anecdotal evidence of it changed and it's different. And if you have actual documentation of the changes, it becomes a little less contentious. You're able to say like, oh, here are the number of times it changed, and here's the way that these changes have impacted our time to fill, and therefore let's work together as a team to solve this problem of changes rather than like we're fighting over how many changes happened and why did these changes happen. So it's a very important management skill that I see like across a lot of different talent leaders at your level, where you're more methodical about taking the data about what impacts recruiting and then converting that into a leadership conversation instead of it being like us versus them, or like, it happened to me, or it's your fault. It's more like change is a problem. We recognize change happens. Here are the different documented ways that we change, whether it's in the ATS, whether it's on the intake session, et cetera.
Ultimately, you're going to have roles where you are both learning along the way. Maybe these kind of companies, maybe the hiring manager really, truly, what they need, they're identifying as they talk to some candidates. You want the role to change before you make that hire to make sure you made the right hire. You don't want to hire someone version 1. It's actually not what we need. Let's let them go.
Yeah. And you're going to have, regardless of how good you are, especially at the scale-ups, right? I'd say at the more established companies, they're going to have checks and balances in place, some by way of the longest interview process ever, but others with, some process-based changes. But if you're joining early stage, soon to be unicorn, especially in this age of AI where people are figuring it out, like what it means to be different roles, you just have to have a way to like establish the team effort of trying to do recruiting and trying to like, here's what you asked, here's what we produced, here are the changes in what you asked, here's the result of what we produced as a team effort. Because the second you make it like us versus them, you're not going to win. You're going to have a real hard time in recruiting, providing the service of finding good people to the business.
Absolutely. We should talk about that even briefly on intake forms and the process. The focus I've placed on process at times has been almost too strict. And so you definitely have to ease up. And while you want this interview plan and intake form to be perfect and totally filled out, you have to give and take. You have to sometimes fill in the gaps, operate with a little bit less, meet the hiring manager where they are at the time. So you can't be super strict also. You have to have some give.
Yeah, that we want the perfect intake form, but they might be juggling 40 other things that week, and hiring the right person takes time to fill times no plus notice period. You know what I mean? Where they might be dealing with fires that have to happen today. So have a good process for what it is you need from a hiring manager. Know your minimums so that you understand what you need to take from this manager to get the process started. And then use your own intuition, whether it's the experience you have of recruiting for many similar roles or that plus a AI supplement to help fill in the blanks. And it's much easier for a hiring manager to edit and correct than it is to start from scratch. So the best recruiters, the better recruiters, the ones that get to management are the ones that understand that we are providing this service, and the best service you could provide is the one that makes it very easy for them to participate in your rules and guidelines. So super helpful advice. I'd love to learn a little bit more about you and your style specifically. Like when you're building your style, right? Like how do you describe your style of recruiting, whether it's as a manager or with candidates?
Yeah, I think my style comes from, I think, my own experience, my own work history, even before what you might see on LinkedIn. Starting in high school, I worked in retail jobs. I worked at Nordstrom for years. I have this background in retail and customer service. So I think when I think of my style, I think it's definitely influenced by that. Customer service bleeds into my role now on the candidate experience side, but also the stakeholder, the hiring manager side. I want to be hyper responsive to them. I want to make sure that they both have good experiences. So for me, that really, I think, bleeds into my style.
Yeah, I always actually, when we were at Uber together, I always looked up to your ability to manage like your stakeholders, right? I think you just had I think that customer service experience that I worked in food when I was coming up, but not nearly the same level of like polish. And so I learned a lot when we were at Uber together about, how to navigate the times where I would say you knew you were right, but you had to like get other people the rest of the way there with you. And it's a tremendously valuable skill that, going back to my original point, I try to stand next to people who I want to be like, and that's what I learned when we were at Uber together.
Yeah.
So I normally transition like, what soft skill do you think's the most valuable for recruiters and recruiting leaders? But I think that definitely fits the bill. What's your favorite metric?
Favorite metric?
Yeah, what's your favorite recruiting metric?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about hires, but I think beyond that, because that's too simple, would be conversion rates. Conversion rates I love because you could look at them for yourself as a recruiter in total. Everything I work on, what's the conversion rates? But you can drill down. You can go to a hiring manager. What are conversions for their roles? What are conversion rates for source of your candidate? Does that differ? I think that at the end of the day is the best way of looking at your health of a search.
Yeah.
Either on your own ability as a recruiter or the team effort.
Yeah, it's a good tool to kind of articulate outliers and drive some accountability for those outliers. So if something isn't converting, whether it's a source of hire or whether it's an individual manager, that's the place to investigate, and it's just a good starting point to see kind of like start to ask why. I agree. I mean, you'll see a number of different things on our conversion rate recommendations on Unicorn. I'll put a link to an article I wrote about diagnosing funnel conversion rates that's probably heavily influenced by the experience we've shared together, but conversion rates are a great tool. And if you're unsure of how to navigate conversion rates for your team, take a look at that article. It'll give you a good start, and then we could dive in from there. What about your outside influences, right? Like books to read, communities to join, influencers to follow. Like where do you take inspiration from in the recruiting space? Anyone you want people to like follow, or you want to give shine to somebody who's helpful to you?
It's a good question. Not specifically, but I have places. So obviously LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn, maybe to negative at some points, but I'm constantly looking through LinkedIn's feed, seeing what people are saying. I follow tons of leaders at all the hot companies. I follow the companies, I follow the heads of TA. I think it's a great way to learn what's current. What are people doing? What tools are they using? So LinkedIn's necessary evil, if you will. But to stay young, TikTok. Honestly, I guess I'm in like recruiter talk. By watching videos, you get more great videos out there. Tons of good interview prep. So I don't know any names of any of the influencers I follow, but I'm sure you'll easily find them once you get into recruiter talk.
I'm not on TikTok. I don't know if that's going to say a lot about me or not, but I do get sent I do get sent the hot recruiting stuff by my friends who are trying to relate to me. I'll say that.
Yeah, I'll start sending you ones I see. I mean, there's really good ones out there, just like how the market's feeling, tips to candidates, some really good ones.
All right. What AI are you other than ChatGPT, is there any other AI tool that's on your brain? Anything that you like?
I mean, Gemini is what I use most, but nothing out of the ordinary, no. I know there are lots of companies out there with sourcing AI. I've never found anything that really is
Does it for you?
replacing me at this point.
Not yet. There's an opportunity, AI companies, to come get Andrew, but you're gonna really have to bring it.
You're gonna have to really bring it.
Yeah. What's going on at AirWallex? You guys hiring? Where should we direct people who are interested in working there? And what advice do you have for them as they go to apply for something at this role or at this company? I mean,
Yeah, doing a lot of hiring at AirWallex. We're seeing a ton of growth in the Americas region. We do a lot of our hiring in San Francisco, hybrid model, Gawkin office. We probably almost doubled in size in 2024. We're seeing lots of growth in 2025. A really exciting time at the company. So a lot of our hiring is in sales, but we have all kinds of representation from the company in San Francisco, legal, operations, marketing, so a bit of everything.
all over growth.
All over growth.
right.
AirWallex Careers, Google it, apply to roles. I think the biggest advice, honestly, is not too groundbreaking, but it's apply to roles that you meet the qualifications for. That's what recruiters are looking at. The job descriptions that we spend a lot of time on, the qualifications listed are the ones that we truly need. Objectively, do you hit them? Those are the ones to apply to. And then, again, not groundbreaking stuff, but it's okay to apply to more than one role, but don't apply to ones that are very different from each other.
Yeah. That's if you can do both of them, you can't do either of them at the unicorn level. Do you agree with
I
that
think
statement?
companies want to know that you are a recruiter. You love recruiting, you want to be in recruiting. So if you apply to a recruiter role and an HRBP role, it's confusing.
Yeah.
It can be.
Okay. So focus your stuff. Pick one, and you could apply to multiple jobs, but at one company at the same application period, it might be sending signals to the business that they're unsure where to place you, or it might create competition between recruiters for the same role. So you're adding a complexity that might not be helping your candidacy at an individual company. So
for sure.
What's your thoughts on one page versus two page?
I'm a one pager.
Well, I'm a one pager.
2-page is not going to be a deal breaker. At the end of the day, it's about how you put it together. Are you using the real estate on your resume in a wise way? Is there a giant bar on the side with skills saying that you know how to use Google? That's not a good use of space.
Right. Yeah, we have a template. I'm a one-page person, and I even more so. I used to think it before, the Reels/TikToks came about, but recruiters are people too. They have an attention span just like the rest of the world. So if you're looking at a reel and it doesn't capture your attention, that third page is going to have a hard time getting that reader to really dive into that eighth bullet on your third page. So we have a resume template. Check it out. It kind of highlights what it is that we look for. And if you can't put 25 solid bullets of varying experience that explains the progression of your career to an individual recruiter, download ours. Take a look. We're here to help. Anyway, that's my last unicorn plug. There's a lot of good stuff on the website. We're going to be releasing more. We have some project management tools coming out. We're going to be doing the career ladder, like I mentioned. The QBR, the recruiting QBR, is going to be another popular tool that we get out soon. So stay tuned. And if they exist after this podcast comes out, I'll just put them in the links below, and I'll maybe edit this part, probably not. Anyway, this was awesome, man. I love having these conversations. You're tremendously interesting to talk to. Like I said, we came up together, and I've looked up to you as you've done the work that you've done. And now you're leading some unicorn teams, and it's exciting to see. So,
thank you.
If anyone wants to follow Andrew, LinkedIn is where you'll find him. Where else? Anything else you want to drive people to?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the way to go.
LinkedIn. Give him a connect. Follow what he's doing, and I hope that we get to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.